You ever have one of those moments where someone tries to pull rank on you and you just sit there thinking, oh buddy, you have no idea who you're messing with? That was me, sitting in my patrol car, looking for a spot to park. It had been a long shift, and I was finally off duty, heading over to a quiet residential area to visit a friend. Nothing major, just a quick stop before heading home. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in those golden hues that make everything feel peaceful. Then, just as I was about to pull into a parking spot near the community clubhouse, he appeared. Man in a stiff uniform, chest puffed out like he was about to give a TED Talk on how to be the most annoying person alive. He stepped right in front of my car and held up his hand like he was directing traffic. I hit the brakes, not because I had to, but because I was genuinely curious. I rolled down my window. Everything all right? His face tightened. You can't park here. I raised an eyebrow. Says who? He straightened his already too tight belt and smirked. I'm with the HOA security department. This is private property and only authorized vehicles can park here. Now, here's where things got interesting. I'd heard about HOA enforcers before. Self-appointed mini-dictators who thought they were running their own private police force. But this guy? He had the full setup. A uniform, a fake badge clipped to his belt, and even a little radio strapped to his shoulder, like he was waiting for a SWAT team to back him up. I kept my face neutral, playing along. You're with the police? He smirked again. We handle security in this neighborhood. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. Ah, there it was. The fake authority flex. Now, normally, I'd just move along, not waste my time, but something about this guy rubbed me the wrong way. He was too confident, too eager to throw his weight around, and I could already tell. He had no idea who he was talking to. I glanced at my dashboard where my real police badge sat, half covered by a file folder. I could have ended this right then and there. But where's the fun in that? So I leaned back in my seat, acting as casual as possible. All right, officer. What's your name? His eyes flickered. Just for a second. It's not important. What matters is you can't park here. I suggest you move before I have to escalate this. Oh, this was getting good. I tilted my head. Escalate? How exactly? He crossed his arms. I'll have your car towed. I almost laughed. The only tow truck that would be showing up today would be the one I called to haul his ego away. But I wasn't done playing just yet, so I gave him a polite nod. All right. I hear you. But before I move, I'd like to see some ID. You know, just to verify your authority. His face twitched. I don't need to show you anything. Bingo. I let the silence stretch between us, watching as his confidence started to crack. Because here's the thing about people who fake authority. They're real bold until someone calls their bluff. And I was about to call the biggest bluff of his life. I could already tell this guy had been waiting his whole life for a moment like this. The way he squared his shoulders, the smug little tilt of his chin. He thought he had all the power in the world right now. And I was just waiting for him to dig his own grave. You need to move, he repeated, his voice dripping with the kind of fake authority that made my eye twitch. This is private property, and unauthorized vehicles are strictly prohibited. I rested my arm on the car window, making myself comfortable. Oh yeah? Who says? His smirk deepened, as if he had been waiting for that question. With a dramatic flair, he tapped his plastic-looking badge. Hey, real quick. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. The Homeowners Association Security Department. I almost laughed. Almost. This dude was acting like he worked for the FBI, when in reality, he was just a glorified neighborhood hall monitor. I gave him my best polite but skeptical look. And what authority does the HOA security department have? He scoffed, clearly irritated that I wasn't immediately trembling in fear. We enforce the rules here, and one of those rules is that only residents and registered guests can park in this area. You are neither. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, pretending to think. So let me get this straight. You're telling me that you, an HOA security officer, have the power to enforce laws? His eyes twitched, but he covered it quickly. I never said laws, but HOA regulations are legally binding within this community, right? I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. And how exactly do you enforce these legally binding regulations? I could see his confidence starting to crack. Just a little. But he wasn't ready to back down yet. If you don't move your vehicle, he said, voice hardening, I'll have it towed. Oh, now this was just precious. I kept my voice calm, but there was a sharp edge to it now. You're gonna call a tow truck? That's right, he snapped. And I'll issue a citation for violating HOA parking rules. I let out a slow whistle. Wow, sounds serious. He puffed up his chest. It is. Now, I could have ended it right there. I could have just flashed my actual badge and watched his entire world crumble in front of him. But I was having way too much fun watching this guy dig himself deeper, so I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice like we were sharing a secret. You know what's funny? He blinked. What? I smiled. I haven't told you who I am yet. For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty crossed his face. And oh, buddy, he should have been very, very concerned. The second I saw his face twitch, I knew I had him. See, real law enforcement officers, they don't flinch when someone asks for their credentials. They don't hesitate, they don't stammer, and they sure as hell don't avoid answering simple questions. But this guy, he was starting to sweat. I leaned back against my seat, giving him another once-over. Now that I was really looking, the cracks were obvious. His uniform was almost convincing, but something was off. The material was too stiff, too generic. Like something you'd order from an online costume shop that promised authentic security gear, but really just sent you a knockoff. Then there was the badge. It looked real from a distance, but up close? It was a joke. No official insignia, no department name, just a cheap gold plate with HOA security stamped across it in bold letters. Not officer, not enforcement, just security. Big difference. And the belt? Empty. No radio, no handcuffs, no gear. Just a belt like he'd thrown it on to complete the look. Now here's the thing. I don't have a problem with actual security officers. I respect them. They do a job, and plenty of them are professional, trained, and know their limits. But this guy? This was the kind of person who got drunk on pretend power. He didn't want to protect the community. He wanted control. And he had no idea that he had just picked a fight with the real thing. I decided to push him a little further. So, I said casually, "What precinct are you with?" He blinked. "What?" I tilted my head. "If you're stopping me from parking, I assume you're with local law enforcement. So, which precinct do you report to?" He licked his lips. Probably, realizing he had no good answer. I work with the neighborhood enforcement team." "Oh, that was rich." I nodded, pretending to be impressed. "Wow, that sounds official. Do you guys carry jurisdiction outside of the HOA?" His jaw clenched. We operate under the HOA's legal guidelines." Uh-huh. I let that hang in the air for a second. "So, just to clarify, you're not an actual police officer?" His face went red. "I didn't say that." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say you were either." Boom. The tension in the air shifted. For the first time, he realized I wasn't buying his act, and I could tell. He was scrambling, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. But the thing about fake authority, it only works on people who don't know any better. And unfortunately for him, he had picked the worst possible person to try and intimidate. I folded my arms. "All right, how about this? Let's make it simple. Show me your ID." That's when I saw it, the tiny flicker of panic in his eyes. He hesitated, just for a second, and in that second, he knew it. I knew. I wasn't just some random guy parking where I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't a clueless civilian who would nod and obey, just because someone in a badge told me to. And now, he was in trouble. He adjusted his belt again, suddenly less sure of himself. "I don't have to show you my ID." I smirked. "That's funny, because if you were actually law enforcement, you'd know that real officers are required to identify themselves when asked. So let's try again. Show me your badge. And this time, let's see if it has a real department name on it." He was stuck. If he refused, he'd be admitting he was fake. If he handed it over, I'd prove he was fake. Either way, he wasn't walking away from this clean. and I was about to watch him unravel. The moment I asked for his ID, I saw it. The briefest flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew he was cornered, but instead of backing down like a rational person, he did what all wannabe tough guys do. He doubled down. "You don't need to see my ID," he snapped, his voice a little too sharp, a little too rushed. "I already told you I work for the HOA security department. That's all you need to know." I raised an eyebrow. "Huh, that's funny, because where I work, real officers don't get all cagey when someone asks for credentials." His hands twitched at his sides, but he held his ground. "I don't have to prove anything to you. What I do have to do is enforce HOA rules, and right now you're in violation of community parking regulations." I leaned against my car, folding my arms. "Oh yeah? Which specific regulation am I violating?" He blinked. "What?" I nodded toward the pristine parking lot. "Which rule? What's the exact code? Because I'd love to hear the official HOA statute that says I can't park here." I saw the wheels in his head turning. He didn't expect pushback. He expected obedience, but he still wasn't ready to admit defeat. Instead, he straightened his back and crossed his arms, mirroring my stance. "I don't have to quote chapter and verse to you. I'm authorizing a citation right now. And if you don't move your vehicle, I'll have no choice but to escalate this." I tilted my head. "Oh? And what exactly does escalate mean?" He smirked like he'd just played his trump card. "I'll call for backup." I almost laughed. "Backup? Oh, this was getting good." I nodded slowly, as if considering his very serious threat. "Back up, right. And who exactly is backing you up?" I could tell he wasn't expecting that question. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before clearing his throat. "I have direct contact with the neighborhood response team." "That was it." I lost it. A chuckle escaped before I could stop it. "The neighborhood response team?" His eyes darkened. "Yeah. We take HOA violations very seriously." I grinned. "Oh, I can tell. So, let me get this straight. You're gonna radio in the neighborhood response team to handle an illegally parked car?" "That's right." "And let's say they show up," I continued, barely keeping a straight face. "Then what?" He straightened, misinterpreting my question as uncertainty. "Then we'll deal with the situation accordingly." "Ah," I said, nodding. "And by deal with the situation, you mean what? Handcuffs? Arrest? Maybe take me to the HOA detention center?" His mouth pressed into a thin line. "I don't need to explain protocol to you." I grinned. "No, you really do." The frustration was boiling over now. His ears were turning red, and his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. "You think this is a joke?" he snapped. I shrugged. "I don't know, man. You tell me." "Because from where I'm standing, you don't have a badge. You don't have ID. You don't even have a real reason to be stopping me. And now you're telling me you're gonna call for backup from a neighborhood response team?" I stepped forward just enough to make him flinch. "So, either you're impersonating law enforcement, which is illegal, by the way, or you're just a guy who really, really likes to feel important." His confidence shattered. But the best part? I still hadn't told him who I was. The silence between us, stretched, thick with tension. The so-called HOA enforcer had gone from overconfident to visibly uncomfortable. But he still hadn't figured it out. Not yet. He was still clinging to the tiny bit of control he thought he had left. "Look," he said, his voice a little shakier. "Now, I don't have time for this. Either you move your car, or I'll be forced to write you up." I let out a slow, amused breath. "A write-up, huh? And what happens after that?" He squared his shoulders, grasping at his last shred of authority. "It'll go on your record." That was it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed. A deep, genuine, "you've got to be kidding me" laugh. And that's when I saw it, the first real flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had no idea why I was laughing. He should have. But he didn't, and that made this moment even better. Still chuckling, I reached inside my jacket, nice and slow, making sure he saw exactly what I was pulling out. A real badge, not a plastic HOA knockoff, not some meaningless security tag. A fully authenticated government-issued sheriff's badge. The second his eyes landed on it, his face drained of color. I swear I could almost hear the gears in his head screeching to a stop. I held it up, letting the overhead lights gleam off the metal. Then, just for good measure, I flipped open my official credentials, ID, department seal, the whole package. And then, I said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You've been trying to pull rank on the actual sheriff. The transformation was instant. All that confidence? Gone. The bravado? Evaporated. The smirk? Dead and buried. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. He was speechless. I took a step, closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure he felt every single word. You want to explain to me, I said, why you're out here pretending to be law enforcement? His breath hitched. I wasn't pretending, I raised an eyebrow. Oh? So you're saying you actually do have police authority? He froze. If he said yes, he'd be impersonating an officer. A felony. If he said no, then he'd be admitting. He was nothing more than a glorified rent-a-cop with a superiority complex. He had no way out, so, instead, he panicked. I was just following orders, he blurted. I didn't mean, I sighed, shaking my head. Let me guess, you thought you could intimidate people. You thought nobody would push back. He swallowed hard. Look, Sheriff, now I'm Sheriff, huh? I smirked. Funny how that works. His face was pure horror. And the best part? This was just the beginning of his problems. I let the silence stretch between us, watching as the fake officer's confidence crumbled into dust. His hands twitched at his sides, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal looking for an exit. But there wasn't one. Not this time. He had spent so much time intimidating people, playing the part of a man with power, and now? The act was over. I pulled out my radio, my voice calm but firm. Dispatch, this is Sheriff. Last name. I need a unit at my location for verification of an individual impersonating law enforcement. The fake HOA cop's breath hitched. His eyes went wide. Now he knew. This wasn't just some guy calling his bluff. This wasn't just an argument. Over parking. He was in real trouble. Wait, he stammered, raising a shaky hand. That's not necessary. I mean, I wasn't trying to pretend I was a cop. I was just what? I cut in, crossing my arms. Just lying to residents? Just making up rules that don't exist? Just threatening people with authority? You don't have? He swallowed hard. I was just following protocol. I tilted my head. Whose protocol? Because I'm looking at the official HOA bylaws right now. I held up my phone where I had pulled up the actual regulations. And guess what? There's no mention of an HOA police force. No mention of fines. No mention of towing cars without proper notice. He had nothing to say. That's when the real squad car pulled up. Lights flashing. Doors opening. A real officer, one of my deputies, stepped out, his expression already unimpressed. Sheriff, what's going on here? I gestured to the fake cop. We've got a guy impersonating an officer, harassing residents, and enforcing rules that don't exist. Claims he's HOA police. But I'd love to see what jurisdiction that falls under. My deputy turned to the fraud, sizing him up. You got ID? The fake cop's jaw clenched. I left it in my car. The deputy didn't blink. Then go get it. Now, here's where it got even better. As we stood there, a few actual residents started stepping outside, curious about the flashing lights. And the second they saw who we were dealing with, they started talking. Oh, is he finally getting in? Trouble? That guy has been harassing people for years. He told my grandmother she couldn't have her front porch light on past 10 p.m. Like, what? He threatened to fine me for having my car parked at an angle. The more they spoke, the worse it got. This guy hadn't just been pretending to be an officer. He had been running an entire scam, issuing fake fines, towing cars for no reason, harassing people with rules that didn't exist, and now he was finally exposed. By this point, the so-called HOA cop looked like he was about 2 seconds away from bolting, but there was nowhere to run. Not anymore. My deputy, arms crossed, gave him one last chance. All right, buddy, you got anything real to prove who you are? Or are we going to have to do this the hard way? The fraud swallowed hard. I told you, I work for the HOA. I smirked. Yeah? And where exactly does it say HOA security has the legal right to issue fines, tow vehicles, or impersonate officers? He didn't answer, because we both knew it didn't exist, and now he was officially screwed. My deputy pulled out his own radio. Dispatch. Run a check on an individual claiming to be private security under HOA authority. Possible case of impersonating law enforcement. The fake cop snapped. Impersonating? That's ridiculous. I never said I was a real cop. I raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Yeah, he stammered. I mean, you told me I was violating community regulations, I reminded him. You threatened to tow my car. You refused to show identification. You even said you'd call for backup. I chuckled. What exactly were you trying to convince me of? He opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no excuse, and then came the final blow. One of the residents, a woman in her 60s, stepped forward. Officer, I have something you should see. She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen. I recorded him last week threatening my husband with arrest. I turned to the fake cop, grinning. So, still want to claim you weren't pretending to be law enforcement? His face turned an ugly shade of red. The deputy didn't wait. Turn around. What? No, Turn around. Hands behind your back. And just like that, the cuffs clicked into place. A ripple of relief and satisfaction passed through the watching residents. One of them clapped. Another let out a low whistle. And me? I simply walked to my car, the very same spot he tried to stop me from parking in, and slid into the driver's seat. No tickets, no fines, no problems. Because guess what? I was right all along. As the deputy loaded the fraud into the back of the squad car, I rolled down my window, giving him one last look. Maybe next time, I said, pick a fight with someone who isn't an actual sheriff. The door slammed shut. And just like that, justice was served. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew the truth. Turns out, our fake HOA officer had been running his little power trip operation for years, issuing fake fines, threatening residents with bogus citations, and making up nonsense rules just because he could. And people? Oh, they were pissed. Wait, so all those fines I paid weren't real? That jerk told me I couldn't have a garden gnome on my porch because it was a security risk. He once threatened to tow my car for being too shiny. I thought he was kidding. The HOA board? Under investigation. Turns out they had known about this guy's antics for a while, but instead of shutting him down, they let him keep going. Why? Because he was convenient. He kept people too scared. To push back, well, not anymore. And me? I was enjoying every second of it. Sitting in my car, engine running, I took one last look at the neighborhood. The fraud was gone. The truth was out. And the residents? They were finally free from the HOA's ridiculous little reign of terror. Before I pulled out, I rolled down my window, addressing the small group of people still shaking their heads over what just happened. Lesson of the day? I said, smirking. Know your rights. Don't let fake authority push you around. A couple of them cheered. One guy actually saluted me. And with that I drove off like a boss, leaving behind one final beautiful image. A neighborhood that had finally taken its power back. What do you think about this story? Have you ever seen someone get put in their place like this? Where are you watching from? I love seeing how far our community reaches. Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.